Admiral Kefvar stood on the bridge of the Imperial Dreadnought Dominion's edge, his forearms crossed behind his back as he gazed upon the small blue world rotating slowly before them. Earth. Such an insignificant name for such an insignificant planet. The star charts indicated it harbored a primitive species that had barely achieved interstellar travel within their own system. This would be routine. Status report, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 300 conquered worlds. Fleet positioning complete, Admiral, reported Commander Vex Tal from the tactical station. 12 dreadnoughts, 48 cruisers, and 200 escort vessels. The humans have detected our arrival. Their primitive communication networks are active. Kefvar's mandibles clicked with amusement. Active? They're screaming, aren't they? Yes, Admiral. Multiple transmissions across all frequencies. Fear responses are typical for this phase of conquest. The Admiral had overseen 17 system conquests in his career. The pattern never varied. Initial shock, desperate attempts at communication, followed by either immediate surrender or futile resistance that lasted mere hours. The Galactic Empire had perfected subjugation over 10,000 years. No species had ever successfully resisted beyond their initial contact. Open a channel to their planetary government, Kefvar ordered. Standard Imperial Protocol 7. The main screen flickered, revealing a hastily assembled group of humans in what appeared to be some kind of conference room. They looked exactly as the reconnaissance data had suggested. Bipedal, single-torso mammals with primitive features and obvious signs of stress. Their leader, a graying female with determined eyes, stepped forward. "I am Secretary General Chen of the United Nations," she said in their crude language, automatically translated by the ship systems. "We've been expecting you." Kefvar's four eyes narrowed. Expecting them? That was unusual. "I am Admiral Kefvar of the Imperial Navy," he replied, his image filling their screens. "You will surrender your planet unconditionally and submit to Imperial rule. Your species will be cataloged, processed, and assigned appropriate roles within the Empire. Compliance will result in minimal casualties. Resistance will result in complete extinction. You have 1 standard hour to respond." Secretary General Chen's expression didn't change. If anything, she seemed to relax slightly. "Admiral, we've studied your Empire's expansion patterns for the past 50 years. We know exactly what Imperial rule means. We've seen the mass graves on Zirion Prime. We've intercepted communications from the labor camps on Vorthin. We know about the breeding programs, the genetic modifications, the systematic destruction of every culture you encounter." Kefvar felt his first moment of surprise. These primitives had been watching them for 50 years? "Your surveillance capabilities are irrelevant," he said. "Submit or die. Those are your only options." Chen stepped closer to her transmission device. Behind her, other humans moved with purpose. Not the chaotic panic he'd expected, but organized, determined activity. "Admiral, let me share something about humanity that your intelligence files clearly missed," she said. "We've been at war with ourselves for our entire recorded history. We perfected the art of violence in ways your empire has never imagined. We've built weapons capable of sterilizing our own planet dozens of times over, and we've pointed them at ourselves for decades without flinching. Irrelevant threats, Kefvar dismissed. Your primitive nuclear weapons cannot penetrate Imperial shields." "You're right," Chen agreed. "They can't. But Admiral, you're thinking like a conqueror. We're not thinking about conquering you. We're thinking about making sure that if we fall, we take as much of your empire with us as possible." The conference room behind Chen had transformed. Humans in military uniforms were coordinated with others at complex control stations. Display screens showed what appeared to be tactical information, but the resolution was too poor for the Imperial sensors to decipher. 50 years ago, when we first detected your empire's expansion toward our sector, we made a decision. Chen continued. We could try to run, try to hide, or try to fight conventionally. All of those options led to extinction, so we chose a fourth option, which is... Kefvar found himself asking, though he wasn't sure why. "We chose to become a weapon." The transmission flickered as massive energy signatures suddenly appeared throughout the Earth's solar system. Kefvar's tactical officer began shouting reports. Admiral, multiple massive energy sources activating throughout the system. They're everywhere. Hidden facilities on asteroids, on their outer planets, built into their system's comet clouds. Impossible, Kethvar breathed. Our scouts would have detected construction on that scale. Chin smiled, and for the first time, Kethvar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of conquest. Genuine unease. Admiral, over the past 50 years, humanity hasn't just been preparing to die. We've been preparing to make our deaths count. Every human facility you're detecting right now is connected to others throughout the galaxy. We spent half a century seeding your empire with sleeper agents, with hidden installations, with weapons you can't imagine. You're bluffing. Am I? Chen's smile widened. Check your home world's communication grid. Check the Imperial Academy on Zenthri Prime. Check your Emperor's personal palace on the capital world. Kethvar's communication officer went pale, his 6 eyes wide with horror. Admiral, we're receiving confirmations from Imperial Command. There are energy signatures matching these readings appearing throughout Imperial space. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Chin leaned forward, her expression no longer diplomatic but predatory. This is humanity's final warning to your empire, Admiral. We don't surrender. We don't negotiate. We don't stop until it's ash. All of it. Your ships, your worlds, your entire civilization. You wanted to conquer us? Congratulations. You just declared war on a species that's been practicing genocide for sport. The Imperial fleet hung motionless in space as reports flooded in from across the Empire. Admiral Kethvar's bridge had become a chaos of overlapping communications, emergency alerts, and tactical displays showing impossible readings. Report from Sector Command 9. Communications Officer Wyalok announced, his voice cracking with strain. Multiple Imperial installations across 17 systems are reporting massive energy buildups from previously undetected sources. The patterns match what we're seeing here. Kethvar's tactical mind raced. This wasn't possible. The Empire's intelligence network was flawless, built on 10 millennia of conquest and refined to the subjugation of thousands of species. No primitive civilization could have penetrated their security so thoroughly. Admiral, Commander Vextal called out, we're receiving a priority transmission from Imperial High Command. The main screen split, showing Secretary General Chun on one side and Emperor Thaxine himself on the other. The Emperor's massive form filled his throne chamber, his 12 arms gesturing with obvious agitation. Admiral Kethvar, the Emperor's voice boomed, explain to me how a species that hasn't achieved faster-than-light travel has managed to place weapons throughout my empire. Before Kethvar could respond, Chin interrupted. Your Majesty, perhaps I can explain. You see, while it's true that humanity hasn't achieved faster-than-light travel, we've had something else of the past century, the ability to think in generational time frames. The Emperor's primary eyes focus on the human female with deadly intensity. Speak plainly, primitive. 150 years ago, we intercepted the first signals from your Empire's expansion fleet, long-range communications detailing your conquest of the Altarian system. We realized we had perhaps 2 centuries before you reached our sector. Chen's voice remained steady, conversational even. So we began what we called the long preparation. On the tactical display, more energy signatures were appearing throughout the solar system. Entire asteroid belts were lighting up with power sources that had somehow remained hidden for decades. We sent our first-generation ships out that same year. Chung continued, not toward other star systems to establish colonies, toward your empire. Slow ships, carrying small teams of humans in cryogenic suspension, along with our most advanced AI systems and manufacturing capabilities. Commander Vextal's face had gone pale. Admiral, if they launched ships 150 years ago, they would have reached Imperial space 70 years ago. Kethvar completed, his 4 arms trembling with the implications. Precisely, Chin said, as if she could hear their conversation. 70 years for our people to wake up, establish in facilities, and begin the real work. You see, Your Majesty, we didn't try to match your technology. We tried to exceed it. The Emperor leaned forward on his throne. Impossible. The Empire possesses the most advanced technology in the galaxy. The Empire possesses the most advanced conquering technology, Chin corrected. But you've never needed to develop the technology of total annihilation. Why would you? You want to rule planets, harvest resources, control populations. Destruction isn't profitable. She gestured, and behind her, a massive display screen showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Thousands of red dots were scattered throughout Imperial space, each one pulsing with energy readings. But we don't want to rule anything. We want to make sure that if we die, you die with us. Every single installation you're seeing has one purpose: the complete sterilization of everything within a 50-light-year radius. The bridge fell silent, except for the steady stream of incoming reports. Each one confirmed what they were beginning to understand. Humanity had turned the entire galaxy into a weapon pointed at the Empire's heart. "This is madness," the Emperor declared. "You would destroy billions of innocent lives." Chen's expression hardened. Innocent? Were the children on Vexler Prime innocent when your forces turned them into mining slaves? Were the artists on Quellan innocent when you erased their culture and replaced it with Imperial doctrine? Were the scientists on Murthic innocent when you lobotomized them for asking questions? Each accusation hit like a physical blow. These weren't general complaints about Imperial policy. These were specific incidents, documented war crimes that the Empire had committed across centuries of expansion. "How do you know these events?" Kethvar demanded. "Because we were there," Chin replied. "Hidden among your own forces, recording everything, learning everything, planning everything. Did you think the refugees who escaped those worlds simply vanished? Some of them found their way to human space. They told us stories, Admiral, stories that convince us that any species capable of such systematic evil deserves to burn." The tactical officer suddenly shouted, "Admiral!" Massive energy spike from a human homeworld. On the main screen, Earth itself began to glow, not with the warm light of a living world, but with a harsh radiance of barely contained stellar energy. "What have you done?" Kethvar whispered. "We've turned our planet into a bomb," Chin said simply. "Not nuclear, something far more elegant. We've destabilized our sun's core through quantum manipulation. When we trigger the sequence, Sol will go supernova within minutes. The blast will sterilize everything within 10 light years instantly." The Emperor's voice cut through the stunned silence. "You would murder your own species? To stop you?" "Yes." Chen's voice carried absolute conviction. "But that's just the beginning. Every installation throughout your empire is synchronized. The moment Earth dies, they all activate simultaneously. Your entire civilization will be consumed by artificial supernovas, quantum cascade reactions, and dimensional rifts that will tear space-time itself apart." She stepped toward the screen, her eyes locked with the Emperor's. "This is humanity's gift to the galaxy, Your Majesty. We will end the age of empires forever. When we're done, there won't be enough left of your civilization to fill a single grave." The Emperor's 12 arms flexed with rage. "I will not be threatened by primitives." "This isn't a threat," Chin replied. "This is a promise." Emperor Thaxion's rage echoed through the throne chamber as he severed the connection to the human world. In the sudden silence that followed, Admiral Kethvar found himself staring at Secretary General Chen's unwavering expression, her words still hanging in the air like poison. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We're receiving reports from across the Empire. The energy signatures aren't just weapons. They're quantum resonance devices. Each one is synchronized to create a cascade effect." Kethvar's mind, trained through centuries of military strategy, began processing the implications. "How many confirmed installations?" "Over 4,000, sir, and still counting." The number struck him like a physical blow. 4,000 weapons scattered throughout the Empire, each capable of triggering stellar collapse. But what terrified him more was the coordination required. This wasn't the desperate gambit of a cornered species. This was a calculated execution of a plan that had been generations in the making. "Chun," he said, his voice carrying new respect despite himself. "Your species will be extinct within the hour. Your home world will be a memory. What could possibly motivate such absolute dedication to mutual destruction? The human leader moved to a window, gazing out at the Imperial fleet that darkened their sky. When she turned back, her expression had softened, showing a weariness that seemed to carry the weight of her entire species. "Admiral, let me tell you about a human named David Chun. He was my great-grandfather, and he lived through something we call the Second World War. When he was 12 years old, he watched Imperial forces, though we didn't know that's what they were then, destroy his city. Not conquest, not occupation. Complete annihilation of everything he had ever loved." She moved to another display, this one showing historical footage of devastated cities, burning landscapes, and columns of refugees. But David survived, and he spent the rest of his life asking one question. What if we had been ready? What if, instead of being victims, we had been prepared to make our deaths cost our enemies everything they valued? Kethvar found himself drawn into the human's narrative despite his military training. Something about her words resonated with tactical principles he recognized. When our astronomers first detected your empire's expansion pattern, David was still alive. He was 97 years old, in a wheelchair, barely able to speak. But when the government briefed him on what was coming, he whispered 7 words that became our species' guiding principle. She paused, her eyes meeting Kethvar's through the screen. "Make them pay for every human life." The bridge fell silent. In the tactical displays around them, the energy signatures from the human installations continued to grow stronger, each one a testament to decades of preparation and sacrifice. "We spent the next 50 years modeling every possible scenario," Chin continued. "Surrender meant slow extinction through slavery and cultural elimination. Conventional resistance meant quick extinction through military annihilation. Flight meant eventual extinction when you found us again. So you chose suicide," Commander Vextal observed. "No," Chin corrected, her voice gaining strength. "We chose to redefine victory. You see, Admiral, your empire has conquered thousands of species because you offer them a choice between survival as slaves or death as martyrs. But what if a species refused both options? What if they chose to make their extinction your extinction?" New alerts began cascading across the Imperial bridge systems. Reports from across the Empire painted an increasingly desperate picture. The human installations weren't just weapons. They were positioned at critical infrastructure points, near population centers, within the Empire's most vital systems. Status report from the Imperial Academy. The communications officer announced, his voice hollow. "The installation there isn't just targeting the planet. It's positioned to destabilize the entire system's primary shipping lane. If it activates, it will cut off supply routes to 12 sectors. The pattern is consistent across all reported sites," the tactical officer added. "They're not just trying to kill us. They're trying to cripple our civilization's ability to maintain itself." Chin nodded as if she could hear their reports. "Every installation was placed with surgical precision. We studied your empire for 70 years, learning your weaknesses, mapping your dependencies. We know which systems would cripple your economy, which planets contain your strategic reserves, which locations would create the maximum cascading failures." She gestured to her display, which now showed a detailed analysis of Imperial infrastructure. The level of intelligence was staggering. It surpassed what many of the Empire's own strategic planners possessed. "But the most important thing we learned," Chin continued, "was that your empire has never faced an enemy that didn't want something from you. Every species you've conquered has fought for territory, resources, survival, ideology. They've all had something to lose, something that made them vulnerable to negotiation or intimidation." Kethvar felt a cold understanding settling in his chest. "But you have nothing left to lose." "Exactly. We've already evacuated our children to hidden colonies beyond your reach. We've already preserved our culture, our knowledge, our genetic heritage in locations you'll never find. The humans you're threatening to kill were volunteers, Admiral. Every single person on this planet chose to stay behind to deliver this message. The weight of that revelation struck the bridge crew like a physical force. An entire planet of volunteers, willing to die to ensure their enemy's destruction. This is insanity, Vextal whispered. This is evolution, Chin replied. For 10,000 years, your empire has been the apex predator of the galaxy. You've grown comfortable, predictable, soft. You've forgotten that evolution doesn't stop, and that eventually something emerges that can kill the apex predator. She moved closer to the screen, her final words carrying the finality of a species' last testament. We are that something, Admiral. We are the antibody the galaxy has evolved to end your infection. And we will not stop until every trace of your empire is nothing but ash floating in the void. The Imperial Dreadnought's bridge erupted in chaos as emergency klaxons began wailing. Every screen displayed the same terrifying message. Energy signatures across the Empire were entering final charging sequences. The human installations weren't just threats anymore. They were weapons preparing to fire. Time to cascade initiation across all Imperial systems. Tactical Officer Rendell announced, his voice cracking under strain. 17 minutes and counting. Admiral Kethvar's arms moved with desperate precision across his command console, opening emergency channels to every Imperial fleet in the galaxy. All commands. This is Admiral Kethvar aboard the Dominion's Edge. Execute emergency protocol Omega immediately. Begin systematic evacuation of all primary worlds. The responses came back in a flood of panic and impossibility. Fleet Admiral Kextor from the core worlds. Admiral, evacuation of 12 billion inhabitants from the capital alone would require 6 months minimum. Commander Yilazake from the Outer Rim. Sir, we don't have transport capacity for even 10% of our colonial populations. Chun watched their desperate communications with something that might have been pity. Admiral, you're thinking like conquerors again. You're trying to save your empire. But your empire is precisely what we're here to destroy. You're talking about genocide on a galactic scale. Kethvar said, his voice hollow with the magnitude of what they faced. Trillions of innocent beings. Innocent. Secretary General Chun moved to a new display, this one showing detailed files on Imperial policies. Let me read you some excerpts from your own military manuals. Admiral, Section 12A. Conquered populations showing resistance tendencies should be reduced by systematic elimination of reproductive age adults. Section 34C. Cultural artifacts and historical records of conquered species are to be destroyed to prevent ideological contamination of imperial doctrine. Each quote struck like a physical blow. These weren't battlefield tactics. They were systematic instructions for cultural and genetic extinction, refined over millennia of conquest. How many species have you erased completely, Admiral? Not conquered, not enslaved, completely removed from existence. Kethvar's tactical mind automatically supplied the answer. 47 species have been deemed incompatible with imperial rule over the past 3 centuries. Standard procedure for races that proved impossible to subjugate or control. The melodic poets of Zentheri, Chun continued, reading from her files. Eliminated because their songs carried mathematical equations that your analysts couldn't decode, fearing hidden messages. The crystal gardens of Elmora, sterilized because their plant-based civilization couldn't be properly cataloged according to imperial biological standards. How do you know these classifications? Commander Vextal demanded. Those files are restricted to the highest levels of Imperial command. Chen's expression showed the first hint of something approaching satisfaction. Because, Commander, we've been inside your highest levels of Imperial command for 60 years. Did you really think we sent only weapons to your space? The bridge fell silent as the implications crashed over them. If humans have been embedded within the Empire's leadership for decades. Status report from Imperial Intelligence. The communications officer announced, his voice barely above a whisper. They're conducting emergency loyalty sweeps across all departments. Initial findings suggest extensive infiltration at senior levels. Define extensive, Kethvar ordered, though he dreaded the answer. Preliminary estimates suggest approximately 30% of Imperial command personnel may be human sleeper agents or human-influenced assets. The number was impossible to process. 30% of the Empire's leadership compromised for decades. Every military strategy, every conquest plan, every classified operation, all potentially known to their enemies. Chin nodded as if confirming their worst fears. We didn't just study your empire from the outside, Admiral. We became part of it. We learned your languages, adopted your cultures, underwent surgical modification to appear as your species. Some of our people spent their entire adult lives serving in your military, earning your trust, rising through your ranks. A new alert appeared on the tactical display. Admiral, Rendell called out, we're receiving a transmission from General Kexrau of the 3rd Imperial Fleet. General Kexrau had been a model Imperial officer for 40 years, decorated veteran of 12 conquest campaigns, trusted advisor to the Emperor himself. When his image appeared on screen, Kethvar felt reality shift beneath his feet. The general's appearance was subtly wrong. His features slightly more angular than typical for his species, his posture carrying mannerisms that now seemed obviously alien. Admiral Kethvar, the general said, his voice carrying an accent that Kethvar suddenly realized he'd never properly identified. I regret that our charade must end. My real name is Colonel James Morrison, United Earth Defense Force, and I've been gathering intelligence on Imperial military capabilities for the past 38 years. The revelation struck like a physical blow. General Kexrau, Colonel Morrison, had been present at the highest levels of military planning. He had access to strategic databases, fleet dispositions, weapon specifications, defensive protocols. Every conquest you planned, every defensive strategy you've developed, every classified project you've initiated, Morrison continued, all of it has been transmitted back to Earth and integrated into our planning. We know your empire better than you know it yourselves. Chin stepped forward, her expression no longer diplomatic, but predatory. This is why we were able to position our installations so precisely, Admiral. This is why we could predict your responses, counter your capabilities, target your vulnerabilities. We didn't just prepare to fight your empire, we prepared to dissect it. Cascade activation in 12 minutes, Rendell announced, his voice mechanical with shock. Kethvar stared at the human leader, his mind struggling to process the scope of their preparation. What do you want from us? Nothing, Chin replied simply. This is a negotiation, Admiral. This is an execution. The galaxy's judgment on 10 millennia of Imperial tyranny. She moved to her final display, showing a countdown timer that matched their tactical readings. In 12 minutes, every installation throughout your empire will activate simultaneously. The cascading supernovas will sterilize approximately 60% of Imperial space within the first hour. The quantum rifts will destabilize subspace throughout the remaining sectors, making faster-than-light travel impossible for approximately 50 years. You're destroying galactic civilization itself, Vextal whispered. We're giving the galaxy a chance to rebuild without you, Chin corrected. The species you enslave will survive in colonies beyond the blast radius. The cultures you suppress will have 50 years to rediscover their identities. The civilizations you crush will rise again in a galaxy finally free of Imperial domination. She looked directly at Kethvar, her final words carrying the weight of her species' ultimate sacrifice. This is humanity's gift to the future, Admiral. We end the age of empires forever. The countdown reached 8 minutes when Admiral Kethvar made a decision that would have been impossible for any Imperial officer to contemplate mere hours before. He opened a direct channel to Emperor Thaxion, bypassing all normal protocols. Your Majesty, he said, his voice carrying decades of military precision, I formally request permission to surrender the Imperial fleet to human forces. The Emperor's 12 eyes blazed with fury. Surrender? To primitives? I would rather see the Empire burn then. Your Majesty, Kethvar interrupted, something he had never done in 3 centuries of service. The Empire is already burning. The question is whether anything survives to rebuild from the ashes. Secretary General Chun watched this exchange with an expression that might have been surprise. For the first time since the confrontation began, she seemed uncertain of how to proceed. Admiral, she said slowly, what exactly are you proposing? Kethvar turned to face her transmission, his forearms spread in the gesture of absolute submission recognized throughout Imperial space. I'm proposing that we stop thinking like conquerors and start thinking like survivors. He gestured to his tactical displays, where the cascade countdown continued its relentless march toward zero. You've demonstrated that you can destroy us completely. Your infiltration of our command structure proves you understand our civilization better than we understand ourselves. Your strategic positioning shows planning capabilities that exceed our own. So teach us. The words came out harder than Kethvar had intended, but he pressed forward. Your species achieved something no conquered race has ever accomplished. You made yourself strong enough to kill us. Show us how to become strong enough to deserve survival. The bridge fell silent except for the steady countdown. 6 minutes, 43 seconds. Chun conferred quietly with advisors who had been silent throughout the confrontation. When she turned back, her expression had shifted from predatory to calculating. What are you offering, Admiral? Complete dissolution of Imperial military command. Immediate cessation of all conquest operations. Full disclosure of Imperial databases to human oversight. Systematic reconstruction of our civilization under human guidance. Emperor Thaxion's roar of rage echoed through every Imperial ship in the fleet. I will not permit. Your Majesty, came a new voice, one that sent shockwaves through command structure. Grand Admiral Velkarin, Supreme Commander of all Imperial forces, appeared on the emergency channel. His image flickered with a distinctive distortion of long-range transmission. I am implementing Emergency Protocol 7 across all Imperial fleets, Velkarin announced. Effective immediately, Imperial Command acknowledges human authority over all military operations. The Emperor's fury turned to stunned disbelief. Velkarin, you dare... I dare to prevent the extinction of every species in Imperial space, the Grand Admiral replied, including our own. Chen raised her hand, and the countdown froze at 4 minutes, 17 seconds. The installations throughout Imperial space remained at full charge, but the cascade initiation had been suspended. You have 1 hour, she said to Kethvar. Demonstrate good faith. Begin immediate withdrawal from all occupied systems. Release all slave populations. Transmit complete Imperial databases to the coordinates we provide. And if we comply? Kethvar asked. Then we discuss what comes next. The installations remain active, Admiral. Any sign of deception, any attempt to resume Imperial operations, any violation of the terms we establish, and the cascade activates automatically. Orders began flowing throughout Imperial space with unprecedented speed. Fleet commanders who had spent centuries perfecting conquest were suddenly coordinating the largest withdrawal in galactic history. Slave camps that had operated for millennia received shutdown orders. Transport ships were redirected from supply runs to evacuation missions. Why? Kethvar asked as he watched his empire dissolve in real time. Why offer us this chance at all? Chen's expression softened slightly, showing the first glimpse of something other than calculated determination. Because, Admiral, humanity learned something from our own history. Destroying an enemy completely doesn't end cycles of violence. It just creates new ones. The species your empire enslaved deserve the chance to rebuild, but they also deserve the chance to choose forgiveness over vengeance. She gestured to displays showing Imperial worlds where massive evacuation efforts were already underway, coordinated by human advisors who had emerged from decades of deep cover. Our infiltration of your empire wasn't just military, Admiral. We have teachers, doctors, engineers, philosophers embedded throughout your space. For 70 years, they've been learning not just how to destroy you, but how to heal the damage you've caused. And us? Vextal asked, what happens to Imperial citizens? You learn to become something better, Chen replied. Or you don't, and the cascade activates. The choice is yours. The main screen showed Emperor Thaxion slumped on his throne, his 12 arms hanging limply as the reports flooded in. His empire, built over 10 millennia, was dissolving in hours. The age of empires is ending, Chen announced. Her words carried across every Imperial communication channel. What comes next depends on whether you can learn to build something worth preserving. Admiral Kethvar looked around his bridge, at officers who had spent their lives serving an institution that was ceasing to exist, at tactical displays showing the coordinated dismantling of the greatest military force in galactic history, at communication channels filled with former slaves taking their first breaths of freedom in centuries. Admiral, His communications officer called out, voice filled with something that might have been hope. We're receiving response confirmations from across Imperial space. Compliance is universal. Kethvar nodded, then turned back to Secretary General Chun. What do we do now? Now, she said, we find out if your species can learn to build instead of conquer. If you can protect instead of dominate. If you can grow beyond what you were. The installations throughout Imperial space remained at full charge, eternal guardians against the return of tyranny. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy held its breath and dared to hope. The final warning had become the first promise of something better.